Mary Safford liked to stand on top of tree stumps on her family's farm in Hamilton, Illinois, not far from the banks of the Mississippi River where she grew up, and talk out loud, telling people what she thought and felt about the meaning and purpose of life. Now, Mary was only 7 or 8 years old when she started climbing trees and standing on tree stumps, and it was back in 1858, which is almost 160 years ago. But even so young, she felt like she had something important to say. So she started her career preaching to her family in a field behind her parents' farmhouse, standing on a tree stump. Now, back in those days, women and girls wore long dresses all the time, long dresses with long sleeves and high collars, and they were always black, a little bit like this robe, a little bit different though. And Mary's family enjoyed her performances. It all seemed harmless enough. After all, Mary's mother, named Louisa Safford, expected her daughter to work for the church in the kitchen. And she also expected her to pray from the pews. What harm could it do, she thought, if Mary practiced preaching to her family? Well, those of you who are parents and grandparents know how much we want to protect our children from pain and disappointment, from losses and failure. And those of us who are children, and that's all of us, know what it's like to want to test the limits of our lives, to push, to want to take risks so that something new or different or better might happen to us in our own lives. Mary wanted to be more than what her mother imagined was possible or appropriate or desirable. And so Mary tested the limits of her time, in part thanks to her father. While her mother was teaching Mary about a woman's proper place in the world, in the kitchen and in the pew, her father was introducing Mary to new ideas. Stephen Safford, her dad, was a farmer, a teacher, and a thinker, a bold thinker. So bold that he was regularly called to appear before the family's church board to defend his radical notions. For example, for thinking things like the Bible could sometimes be wrong, slavery was wrong, and evolution sounded pretty darn smart. This was 160 years ago. When Mary's father died, unfortunately, when she was only 9 years old, Mary started reading her father's books. She was surprised to learn that heroes of the American Revolution, people like Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, had left mainline Christian churches in favor of a more rational faith. By reading and talking with friends who came from other churches in Illinois, she learned that what people believed was bigger and broader than what her mother had told her. She saw sense in a God that did not intervene in our daily lives, but who made us free to be within the boundaries of natural laws. She agreed with the great Enlightenment thinkers of her time, like Thomas Paine, who said that the established churches with their conservative creeds were human, not godly inventions, set up to intimidate, even terrify, and control people. She questioned the standard dogmas and doctrines about God and Jesus and women, slowly and steadily setting aside the sinful image of a true Christian woman as paradoxically pure and impure at the same time, but always inferior. God was not a man, she thought. That didn't make any sense. It followed then that Jesus wasn't God, but a man who stayed connected to the source of love in himself and others, no matter what. And women were not sinners responsible for the fall, but whole human beings capable of doing good and doing harm, much like men, capable of teaching and preaching and leading, of being independent and self-sufficient, just like men. She noticed, too, that even though her mother's words reinforced the teachings of the church at the time, her actions, well, in her day-to-day life, her mother managed a farm and a family all on her own. She was strong and as confident and capable as any man Mary knew. So when Mary was in her early 20s, in the mid-1870s, just after the Civil War, she announced her intention to become a Unitarian minister. She started college, but couldn't stay at school because she had to come back home to care for an older sister who was sick. In any case, Harvard, which educated most Unitarian and Universalist clergy at the time, didn't accept women. When she read Ralph Waldo Emerson, she felt, and I quote, a thrill of moral and religious enthusiasm that made her speak the written words out loud, substituting the word woman for man and women for men so that she could make their truth fully hers. She read the great religious thinkers of the time, William Ellery Channing, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Theodore Parker, all Unitarian ministers who each affirmed everybody's worth and dignity, encouraging Mary to listen to the quiet voice inside her that was saying, "You are somebody, and it's okay to be ambitious and want to make yourself heard in public." She took Emerson's challenge to his students to heart, looking for divine revelation inside her own soul. And she decided two things with her best friend Eleanor. First, that they would not marry, and second, that they would study on their own since neither one could attend college. And then together, Mary and Eleanor started the Hawthorne Literary Society and met weekly with other women and men to discuss and debate subjects like whether deception is ever justified and if Congress ought to assume the Alabama claim. Sounds a lot like our own Sunday Circle and Sunday Salon, for those of you who have attended our Sunday morning circles. Oscar Clute, a Unitarian minister, was a favorite guest speaker, and he encouraged Mary and Eleanor to start their first church. As word got around about these women and what they were doing, Jenkin Lloyd-Jones, father of Richard Lloyd-Jones, who was one of the founders of All Souls, became the women's most steadfast male ally. For two reasons. First, he understood the women's frustration about not having been able to go to college to study because he too was unable to study because he was fighting in the Civil War. And second, because he had married into a Unitarian family and his own wife, 9 years older than he, was better educated than he was and sometimes filled his pulpit when he could not be present on Sunday mornings. Jenkin and his wife, Susan, were not just a couple, they were colleagues. And they were co-equal. And so Jenkin had confidence and faith that women ministers could lead the expansion of liberal religion in the West, especially at a time when young male seminary graduates refused to move out to what they called the borders of civilization, because frontier churches in these parts paid badly compared to the established churches, mostly in railroad towns. Because the men didn't want the jobs, the women had the opportunity to show what they were capable of. By the time she was 28 years old, Mary Safford stood with full authorization in a Unitarian pulpit, the pivotal figure in an emerging constellation of clergy women who dominated their church's development on the frontier for the rest of the century. From prophetic sisterhood, liberal women ministers of the frontier, 1880 to 1930. Over the next 50 years, Mary and about 20 other pioneering prophetic women preachers supported each other and planted, fed, and grew dozens of churches throughout the Midwest. Some married, while others chose not to, believing they could do more good in the world by focusing on their work instead of raising families of their own. These mothers of our liberal faith wanted the freedom that came from independence more than they wanted the safety of financial support from a man. As Eleanor figured it, she had two hands and a brain of her own, and no one was going to tell her how to use them. Those who did marry and have children continued running their households at the same time that they ran their churches, caring for their parents and children at the same time that they cared for their flocks. For these prophetic sisters of ours, true religion had to first be free religion, free from any and all irrational dogma that discouraged personal growth. True religion, they taught, must be experienced as part of human experience, as something as real as the law of gravity or as the solar system. They agreed God, or ultimate reality, was best understood as a process that worked through community, an experience I think many of us today still recognize and identify with. But then, despite the fact that several of these women received PhDs, had long, successful careers, and fought tirelessly for the rights of women to vote and for women to control their own reproductive lives, their careers and their lives did not have happy endings. As our country entered the 20th century and weathered the First World War, Unitarian and Universalist leaders at the time, all men at the upper levels, systematically withdrew their support from each and every woman minister in the West. In the 20th century, when women searched for new pulpits, they were told that post is being held for a young man still in seminary. When they asked to apply for open positions, the chairman of the supply committee said he was not accepting applications from females. From 1906 to 1917, not one new woman minister was brought into active Unitarian or Universalist ministry. And although the men accepted Mary Safford's money to build a new parish house, they rejected her leadership, saying then that they needed more men, not more women. If they hadn't already changed careers by then, one by one, the remaining women ministers moved into social work, what we would call social work today, running safe houses and homes for the poor, working in schools and hospitals. And although men tried to actually erase them from the record and the history books, the women persisted in their resistance up until their deaths by writing letters of protest to the male leaders of the two denominations and by writing their own memoirs, which is the only reason we know their stories today. In 1939, remembering, Eleanor Gordon, Mary Safford's best friend from childhood, wrote this: "There's not room on top for both of us, so we women must climb down." But on this Mother's Day, we remember these prophetic women because their rise and their fall are both part of our religious inheritance. And because I see us today as continuing the work of our founding mothers. What's really so strange is that sometimes I can't tell today if we're living in the 21st or the 19th century. We're not wearing long black dresses anymore, but there's still talk about what women should wear to work at the White House. When I think that Mary Safford took the pulpit in the late 19th century, and that at the beginning of the 21st century, some men would challenge my right to be a minister and a preacher because none of the apostles were women. Yes, I've had it said to me. When I think that this year marks 100 years since the first woman, Jeanette Rankin of Montana, was elected to the United States Congress, and that we're only 4 years away from celebrating 100 years of women having the right to vote. When I think, did you know that states get report cards too? Kids, did you know that? States get report cards too, not just you in school. And states get report cards on all kinds of things, like how well they're doing with their budgets, which is like a math grade, and how well we're doing with the environment, which is like a science and economics grade. And states get a grade on how well women are doing in their state with education and health and jobs and pay and more. And the status of women in the states, which is an ongoing research project by the Women's Policy Research Institute, gave us, the state of Oklahoma, the following grades this past year. You ready? Hold on. Political participation, we got a D. Employment and earnings, we got a D+. Work and family, C+. That's our best grade. Poverty and opportunity, D. Reproductive rights, D+. Health and well-being, D. I can hear the Reverends Mary Safford and Eleanor Gordon saying, we have some work to do here in the state of Oklahoma. I pass you in the halls on Sunday mornings and throughout the week, and sometimes I call out, usually to women, not to men. I might start calling out to men too. Hey, are you willing and ready to work for women's rights? And usually you call back to me and you say, yes, sure. And I say, now is the time. Mary dared to test the limits of what was possible when she was just a little girl. And as a young woman, she and Eleanor tested and surpassed the limits set for them by educating themselves and starting their own churches. And Jenkins Lloyd Jones tested the limits of what it meant to be a man by staying loyal to his courageous women colleagues when other men abandoned and betrayed them by not defending their smarts and their skills and their rights to run their own churches. I imagine each of you has dared to test the limits of your own life in various ways. Like Mary's mother, my own mother never imagined I would become a minister, but here I am, and she is proud. Many of us, women and men, marched together on January 21st because our limits were being tested, and we never thought we would find ourselves still fighting today for our freedom, for the right to own and control our own bodies, for equal pay and for time off with pay, for an end to violence against women, for an end to children in our city living in poverty, and for all Oklahomans to find a way so that all children in this state can receive a good education. Mary Safford and Eleanor Gordon were the founding mothers of our faith in the West. It was Reverend Eleanor Gordon who said, "I believe from this pulpit and from these pews will go forth an influence that will make for honor in politics, truth-telling in business, justice in the home, and high ideals of human obligation and responsibility everywhere." And I agree. And I would ask you to please consider signing up in the foyer today if you want to be involved with building a women's movement here at All Souls. We have a men's group. There are All Souls men who are even studying the history of misogyny right now, which gives me great hope. We have the alliances, which were the first women's groups, first day and then evening alliance as more women started to work. In the old days, the alliances did most of the work of the church, although without the long black dresses by then. But younger women in our congregation, and some of you are here, are telling me it's time again for a women's movement, that it's time for some All Souls women to test their own limits, to stand on a new platform or an old tree stump and consider running for office or supporting or managing another woman's campaign. Our faith set our foremothers free to accomplish goals their mothers could never have dreamed. Like a woman senator in Oklahoma who fights and wins to secure funding for our children's and their children's education. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Wait a second. Can you imagine that? Thank you. Because the story still isn't over, and I believe that from this pulpit and these pews will go forth an influence that will make for honor in politics, truth-telling in business, justice in the home, and high ideals of human obligation and responsibility everywhere. So may we each find a way to honor our free faith's founding mothers with more than flowers and cards and brunch, however lovely those may be to enjoy today. May we honor them by testing the limits of our own lives, even or especially when the going gets tough, by never giving up or giving in. May it be so. Amen.
She is woman. Hear her roar in numbers too big to ignore. And she knows too much to go back and pretend. They have heard it all before, and they've been down there on the floor. No one's ever gonna keep them down again. Oh yes, they are wise, but it's wisdom born of pain. Yes, they paid the price, but look how much they gained. If they have to, they can do anything. They are strong, they are invincible. They are woman.